Alright everybody, I know it's been a really long time, but it's time to start on the Oldsmobile. So last time you saw it, it was winter, now it's summer. Life gets in the way, job gets in the way, but I still have it and we're still going to work on it. So last time I had filled the engine full of Marvel Mystery Oil and all the cylinders, and we're going to see today if the engine will actually move. So first I need to go around and yank all the spark plugs out, and then we're going to see with the breaker bar if the engine will move, and then if it does move, I'm going to put a regular ratchet on it and see if I can't spin it all the way over. With that being said, I'll probably pull the valve covers and watch the valve train, make sure all that stuff works like it should. And if I can get it 1 or 2 revolutions in a row, then gets this free engine and we'll go from there. Oh yeah, that turns really nice. I can hear some compression leaking past the spark plugs that I haven't gotten all the way tight. They're just finger tight in, so I could get them out real easy. So I'm going to pull these plugs and then we'll start rotating the motor and make sure there's no dead spot. I'm thinking by now all the Marvel is soaked down into the crankcase, but I'm going to turn it over by hand. Alright, that's once over. Looks really good. So now it's time to pull the valve covers and see what we got underneath. I'm sure my big old head blocked that whole scene. Alright, that looks pretty good. Smells like an old engine. Alright, so there's a little bit of surface rust on it, which I'm not too worried about. But there's almost no sludge in here, which is surprising, but it might just be the style of head that this motor is, that it doesn't collect much sludge. Let me get some of that gasket material is gross. But I don't see any broken push rods or bent push rods, so what we can do is we can turn the motor over. We can see what moves and what doesn't. So I'm seeing some movement, but not as much as I thought I would. I kind of want to put a battery to it and turn it over that way. This is just taking too long. Here's the other side. It's about the same as the far side. I think we might have some stuck valves. We'll see. But yeah, all this rust under here is from moisture creeping in. And the car's been outside for a while, so most of it wipes right off, which is good. So yeah, I'm gonna get a battery on it and watch them turn over that way. I was planning on hooking up this battery. Luckily for me, 1953 is the first year for 12 volts, so not a problem with that. But we have a problem with our cables. So here's the negative cable. It looks really crappy, but it should work. But here's our positive cable. And then if you look at the other end, nothing's attached down there. And you know what? There's no starter. There's no starter for this car. I'm gonna look in the back, but honestly, if there's no starter, I'm stuck for right now. That sucks. Yeah, there's no starter at all. Looks like somebody at the pick and pull yard stole it. So I'm gonna look inside the car, see if there is one, but if there's not, then we're out of luck. Well, just looked inside the car, inside the trunk, there's no starter. So I had to buy a starter. That kind of ruins it for this video. So I will have to wait quite a bit in order to get a starter. So in the meantime, I guess I don't know what I'm gonna do. Figure out battery cables. But yeah, I have to wait on the starter. So That's disappointing, but that's the way that it is. Alright guys, you saw in the last video I needed a starter for this Oldsmobile, which has turned out to be quite a fiasco in getting the starter. So I buy the starter, which is this black part here at the bottom. I get it in, I'm like, oh, I don't have a solenoid. So I buy the solenoid. I get the solenoid in, and I'm like, oh, I don't have this plunger piece. It's a metal plunger that connects basically the solenoid to the starter motor. I'm like, okay, well I got all three of those. I'm ready to put it in. I'm like, oh, I don't have a piece of metal that runs from one of these terminals to the actual starter motor itself. If you look at this cool, it's an original shop manual. If you look at this part right here, it says connector from motor terminal of solenoid. Right there. I need one of those, and I'm assuming that's just a piece of metal, I guess. So I'm going to see if I can't make that. I guess I don't know what it needs to be made out of, but I'm just gonna make it out of metal. The other thing I had to do is I had to find bolts that would fit here to hold the solenoid onto the starter, and then a little nut to hold that together, which I didn't have any of that stuff, and I don't know where in the world I would get it, so I used what I had. So once that's together, we should be good. Then we should be able to throw it in the car and connect the battery cables and see how it all goes. With the starter all ready to go, we can climb underneath this car, which I've actually never done before, and we can look at where the starter is going to go. So there it is. So basically just bolts to the engine block that way, and we can take a look at these wires that we have. So here are two basically small terminal, which I believe go on the small terminal of the solenoid, and then these two large ones go on the large terminal. One's a battery cable and one is for the body power, chassis power. Something interesting to note is you see that? That right there is the master cylinder for this car underneath instead of on top. So I'm going to take these bolts out now, get them all cleaned up so they'll go in pretty easily. I'm also going to clean up the connections to these wires, and we'll throw the starter in. And at that point, we should be ready to at least put the battery in it and see what lights up and what doesn't. One thing that we for sure want to do before we start turning this motor over is we want to drain the oil and fill that back up. So something interesting, that's where you get the oil out of the oil pan. But right up here, that's how you change the oil filter. So yes, it's this big, huge canister that has a filter in it sideways. So that shouldn't have anything in it because the car's been sitting for so long, but you never know. So I'm going to first start with draining the oil and seeing what that looks like. Alright, let's see if I can do this without getting oil everywhere. If there's anything in it, there should be though. There's a chicken. There's a chicken. Alright. Alright, it's black. There's no water in it. That's good. I'll take that any day. We'll let that drain and we'll move on to this canister thing. Alright, well, I loosened the canister up and it's already leaking. So oil in there is good, I guess. I'm going to keep doing it. Hopefully I don't make too big of a mess. Obviously it's really hard not to get it on the exhaust, but what can you do? It's also really windy out today, so I got a lot of splatter everywhere, but hopefully I can contain most of it. We'll see what the filter looks like once we get it out, but the book says you have to turn the wheel all the way to the left so that you can get the oil filter out that way. If you have the wheel moved in like this, there's not enough room, I guess. So we'll see. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to contend with. You got the steering gear, you got the exhaust manifold above, you got the frame, this little shield, all kinds of stuff. Here it is, the big canister. So I believe it's like your normal removable oil filter, other than you're just replacing the element, not the actual outside. But it's just a big bolt that bolts into the side of the engine. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Standard There's still some nasty oil in there. I'll probably let that drain for a little while before I put it back, but yeah. It's a little bit more messy than a modern system, but I guess it still works. Alright, here's the new oil filter. So you have to replace this gasket, which attaches between the housing and the actual pickup. And then also you have to make sure that this cork part goes toward the back. Pretty much like that. So yeah, here's the new one. I guess there's two cork parts. Guess it doesn't matter. Either way. So since we replaced the oil filter, if you were doing just an oil change and not an oil filter change, it would be a 5 quarts of oil, but now since we're doing the oil filter as well, it's 6. That's what the owner's manual says, so that's what we're going to put in it. Since we got the old oil out and the filter in, it's time to put in 5 quarts of eventual 1040. A little thick, but that's okay. And then 1 quart of Marble Mystery. People may say, oh, you're putting the crap Walmart oil in. Well, you know what? It's only going to be in for a couple miles. There's no point in putting $35 worth of oil in an engine that you don't know is even good. So we'll put that in, let it soak, and then we can turn it over with the starter that we put in and see if everything oils. And if everything oils, we can try to fire it up. Surprise! We have the starter out again in order to replace the solenoid. So what I didn't know is that the one that Advanced Auto or whoever it was that I bought it from sent me the wrong one, because what I need is one that looks like this. So if you look in this shop manual and in the wiring diagram, you will see that I need one that has, I believe it's called, basically it's a wire that ignites the ignition coil while the engine is cranking. So I need 2 little terminals and not just one. It is what it is. I got this one supposedly new original stock off of eBay. It looks kind of crappy, but hopefully it will work. So the plan is I'm going to swap the solenoids out, bench test the starter, make sure the solenoid works like it should, and then we'll put it back in the car. And then from there we can figure out what wires go where. So the one problem that I'm having so far with this car is there's a lot of tan with black trace, tan with green, tan with red, tan with black. But the problem is all the tracers are gone. It's basically just they're all tan. So I'm kind of having to figure out little by little what goes where and how it's hooked up. So it might take a little bit longer than I wish it would, but that's just how it goes with these old cars. So alright, here's my little test station contraption thing. The starter is hooked up to this battery using jumper cables, so I have it connected to the housing, the negative, and the positive is at the upper terminal of the solenoid. Now, pretending this is in the car, when you turn the key, you get power to this little terminal right here. I believe it's called the S terminal. And so what happens whenever I put power to it, so I'm going to connect it to the power terminal, or the positive terminal of the battery, you will see it runs, and it runs pretty good. Try it again. Go. So the only other test that I want to do is I want to hook up a test light to this other terminal. That's supposed to, I believe, get power whenever the car is cranking. So we will do that. Alright. So as you can see now, there's no power to it, but when I crank the starter over, which will be cranking the motor over, I get power. So that is ready to go back into the car. Honest truth, if somebody tells you that they bought a car out of pick and part or pick and pull or whatever, don't buy it. So again, we have another thing missing. So see all these wires that are just loose right here? That is for the neutral safety switch, which is supposed to go right here. And of course it's gone. So without that switch, I can't turn the motor over with the key. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hotwire it. You guys saw in the last clip, I got the starter to run on the bench. I'm basically going to do the same thing. So I have this little jumper wire that I have attached to the little terminal on the solenoid, so that when I have the battery hooked up to it, it will spin the motor over. The only thing I'm looking to do right now is to see if I get oil on all my rocker arms. Since we changed the oil and the filter with the engine spinning, we should get some oil pressure eventually. So again, I don't know how long this motor's been sitting. It turns over by hand, but that's about the extent of my knowledge. So if it does get oil to the top, we can move on and then try to get it to run. Luckily, these engines are simple enough that if I can hotwire the coil from this battery, I can turn it over and have ignition all from the battery. After the first initial turnover, almost none of they all move. All the rockers move, but they barely move. They move just a tiny little baby bit. And I'm pretty sure it's because the lifters are not pumping up with oil. Pretty sure this has hydraulic lifters in it. But what I plan on doing is I plan on using this block of wood and then tapping on every one of these valves, kind of loosen them up, and then also back against the lifters, and hopefully that will loosen them up just really lightly, not very hard, and then pretty much exercising the motor over and over and over so that the lifters start pumping. Now, I spun it over 2 or 3 times, and I have found that a couple of these rocker arms start moving a little bit more than they used to when I first turned it over, which I think the oil is starting to pump up and get up top. But it's going to take, without the engine running, it's going to take quite a bit in order to get the engine oil up to here. So, like that one wasn't moving at all in the beginning. So, let me kind of show you what's happening. Watch, I believe this one, I think this one pumped up pretty nicely compared to the other ones. That one on the end, it's not doing anything, but the push rod is moving. I also don't have the spark plugs put in all the way, so it is losing some compression. So I might twist those in at least hand tight. I think there's like only 1 to 2 turns on all of them. So it's going to take some exercise, I think. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get oil to the top end without firing the engine, but luckily I think I can hotwire the coil, and I have all new ignition stuff. I'm just kind of hesitant throwing new ignition parts on this motor if I don't know if it's going to be any good. Alright guys, what the heck. So, I cleaned off the points with sandpaper. I'm going to jump the coil, put 12 volts to the top terminal from the battery, so I don't have to rely on the key. So with spark and everything hooked up, it might run. Maybe not, but maybe. Let's see. Alright guys, sadly that's going to be the end of this video. I don't have some of the ignition components I thought I ordered, that I thought I was ready to go ahead and get it to fire, but guess what? I forgot to buy a condenser and a rotor, so give me another day. But I don't know if I made a video on this, but that's much better than it used to be. I also cleaned a little bit of the paint up. But yeah, sorry I didn't get it to run, but tomorrow is another day, so look out for the next video.